South Gauteng High Court setting aside a decision, as we've headlined, to grant Grace Mugabe diplomatic immunity. Here's the background. The Democratic Alliance bringing the application saying the decision was both illegal and unconstitutional. Mugabe was granted the immunity last year after she allegedly assaulted a model, Gabrielle Engels, at an upmarket hotel here in Johannesburg. Now, the DA says while the chances of Mugabe serving time are slim, it is still, the party says, a matter of principle. Let's hear from the party's James Self. All right, we'll get to James Self in just a moment, but in the meantime, our reporter Silindelo Masikane was in court, and she joins us now. Silindelo, good afternoon to you again. Let's just pick up on what you were telling us a little earlier this afternoon. A very quick judgment that was handed down. What essentially did the judge say?
Yes, Jeremy, quite a short delivery of the judgment. Judge Bashir Valley only delivered really his orders and said that if anybody wanted to read the judgment, they could get it online or from his office. And his 33-page judgment really goes into detail as to why he came to the conclusion that the decision by the then Minister of International Relations, Maite Mashabane, to grant Dr. Grace Mugabe diplomatic immunity after that alleged assault on a local model, Ms. Gabrielle Engels, was actually unconstitutional, and that it needs to be set aside. Now, I've gone through just a little bit of his judgment. It is 33 pages, and what I'm picking up is that the argument from the minister was that listen, if we didn't grant this diplomatic immunity, then it was really going to harm the relations between Zimbabwe as well as South Africa, and the fact that Robert Mugabe was here on business, that meant that his diplomatic immunity was going to extend to his family and his spouse, being Grace Mugabe. Now, the judge says he's gone through international customary law into the extension of diplomatic immunity to spouses. And he says what he found was not the conclusion that the minister came to. And in fact, according to that law, if for example, it was the then President Robert Mugabe who had committed this alleged assault, even he wouldn't have been covered by the diplomatic immunity, because what that law says is that if you cause injury or commit a crime by any chance, then that kind of diplomatic immunity does not cover you in terms of our constitution. So if for example, Robert had committed this crime, even he wouldn't have been able to be covered by this diplomatic immunity, and it only makes sense that extending it to Grace doesn't make sense at all, and that she herself is neither covered by this, and therefore the decision to grant that diplomatic immunity was unlawful.
So my understanding now is that there are two balls in the air as far as recourse is concerned. One is we're hoping to hear, we haven't heard yet unless you have, from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. We would expect some response from them. And of course, the next move is now up to the National Prosecuting Authority.
Yes, indeed. I have actually received a statement from the International Department, and they're saying that they're going to study the judgment, of course, and they will respond if need be. But at this stage, what the department has been ordered to do is to set aside that decision, and of course, they've been also ordered to pay the costs. Now, coming from the NPA side, which we will speak to a little later on, what's expected from them is to basically pick up from where it left off last year. A docket was opened by Ms. Engels. She did lay charges of assault to cause grievous bodily harm, and you would expect that the police have been continuing with investigations, as you would hope, really. But if those have stopped, then now what we expect to happen is that the NPA will now proceed with allowing the police to conclude their investigation, gather evidence, and then it's up to them to decide whether they're going to prosecute. But if then the NPA says, listen, we don't have enough evidence to prosecute, and they decide not to, this doesn't mean Dr. Mugabe is off the hook, because we do know that Engels, who is represented by AfriForum, is intending on pursuing a private prosecution if the NPA fails to do so.
And we know the Democratic Alliance, the opposition Democratic Alliance, was front and center as far as this was concerned. It brought the application at the time saying the decision was both illegal and unconstitutional. But I think you also spoke to a representative a little earlier saying that it's all a matter of principle, that they're not really expecting Grace Mugabe to serve any time.
Certainly. We spoke to the chair of the DA, James Self, who went into detail saying, listen, this was not really about trying to get Grace Mugabe prosecuted. It was a matter of principle and setting a precedent moving forward. So if perhaps anything else happens like this, where a head of state is here and their spouse commits a crime, then there is a precedent that you can't just go around assaulting people and thinking just because you have diplomatic immunity that you won't be charged or you won't be prosecuted. So for the DA, it was a matter of setting a precedent and ensuring that justice is served. But of course, for victims of violence, one expects that there will be processes to take place in order to ensure that Grace Mugabe comes back into the country to face the charges before her. Now, according to AfriForum and the DA, if Grace really believes that she's innocent, then she would come back to the country on her own accord, and she wouldn't have to be forced or have to be extradited in order to get her here. So, of course, that process of actually getting Grace Mugabe back into the country, we're going to see how that process is going to unfold and whether the NPA will issue an extradition for her in order to come back and face these charges. But all of that really remains to be seen, Jeremy.